Welcome to the Music Pro Services podcast. What actually makes a recording sound professional? We've all heard a song and thought, wow, that's a pro recording and that's of high level. But what actually creates that impression? Is it the microphone? Is it the computer? Is it the plugins? Or is it the $5,000 guitar that you've recorded with? The truth is not really. On this episode, I'll be talking about what separates an amateur recording to a pro recording. The first point I want to talk about starts with the performance. So the performance needs to be nearly perfect, right? So great timing, good feel, solid pitch, emotion in there, and the confidence. All of these things combined will give you that fundamental sound of a pro recording. So things are done in stages, and this is the first and the most important stage and the most important point. Performing can be quite difficult for some pieces and some arrangements, but the recording really needs to be the perfect balance of, as I said, great timing, good feel, the solid pitch, but also there has to be something in there, some magic in there that you can produce. So no amount of EQ or no amount of compression or AI these days can actually replace something that has been recorded substandardly, right? Also, a great engineer can enhance the performance that you've given, but cannot really manufacture it. So it's very important to be confident on that recording take. Not only as the actual piece itself, but as the performer. So the performance is where the fundamental stage is at. So the next point is the arrangement. The arrangement is a very important part of the whole recording. Many recordings that have lacking arrangements can sound cluttered, and also can be fighting for attention. So it's very important to know where less is more, and also where to actually put things strategically in the piece. So sometimes you'll have an instrument where it fits in between like a vocal passage and it sounds okay, or sometimes it embellishes it. And then you'll have some other places where, you know what, maybe no instruments are required here, and maybe the vocals are just, the feature of this part here. So an instrument doesn't need to be played all the time. Also, sometimes cluttering can be caused by layering and layering and layering. Do we really need those layers? If you do, well, then that means you're going for a bigger sound. But the arrangement is going to tell you of what the structure is going to be like as well. So just putting and dumping everything into a recording project is not going to be your way of arranging. You have to be really strategic with it. So this is what is going to be listened to by many people and thinking, oh, I like this thing here, or I like that thing there, and things are going to be coming out and going in. That's the whole experience that the listener should have. Therefore, the arrangement is a very important part of it making sound professional. Point 3 is the recording quality. So this is where gear matters a little bit, right? But I think that experience matters a bit more in this realm. So the recording quality is a very important part, and your experience should entail that the room is the adequate space for the recording, the good mic placement, the correct recording levels is very important, because you might not get the opportunity to record this artist again. So you need to really be mindful of all these things. And the recording level, if you're peaking on some of those recordings, it's very hard to get that quality down, right? So as an engineer, as I mentioned before, we don't manufacture these things. These things need to come from the artist, right? So eliminate the background noise as much as possible, and make sure that you're giving yourself some space in regards to later on in the mixing and editing, where you can actually enhance these things, and you're giving space to your own quality, where the plugins and what you're going to do later is going to enhance and not be a repairing kit for it. So the recording quality is detrimental in this aspect. The next point I wanted to talk about is the editing. So professional recordings are incredibly clean, but that doesn't mean that it has to be robotic, right? So it means that sometimes you need to edit things to make them sound really nice and really flowy, to get things, to remove things from, as I mentioned before, from the clutter sometimes. And sometimes there are some things and some mistakes that are being done that you can't get the artist in for. So the editing here is a very important part to actually remove some of those things, or some of those little not mistakes, but even mistakes as well. But aside from mistakes, things that are in the background that you need to remove, you need to cut out. It's very important to make it feel that it's well polished and it's nearly perfect, right? Removing and in saying that, it's the removing of the clicks and pops and everything like that, and choosing the best takes as well, because you can have an array of layers and tracks and say, you know what, I'll choose one of these, right? And you get the artist to lay down a few of the same tracks. So the editing is gonna be there for you to actually choose one of those options to actually be the final cut. And it's a very handy thing to have when you have all these different layers, because you have something to choose from. If you don't have them, well, obviously you've only got the one take, and if that's the case, well, you'll need to work on that. But you'll have the option of cutting and pasting all these other sort of bits and pieces, making it sound very nice and polished and nice to the ear. It's not about recording sometimes all in one take. It's about the project itself. What is it gonna take to make this project from an editing perspective sound fantastic? So that's that editing point there. The next point is about the mixing. So mixing is about balance, and don't confuse this with mastering, right? Mixing is about the balance and getting your levels right, including volume, EQ, compression, the comparing of the other tracks as well, making sure that it's all in line and aligned with the actual tone and the sound of the piece. Can you hear the vocal clearly? Is there anything masking any other instrument? Is anything getting lost in the mix? Does every sound have its own sort of place? Is the low end controlled? Is the high end controlled as well? Before touching the EQ as well, I recommend that you bring everything up to a level where you can hear everything in regards to volume. So get everything where you can hear things that are, it's sort of semi-balanced. Then go ahead and use your EQ to enhance stuff and embellish stuff. But a lot of the pros spend their time not going through EQ, but spend a lot of their time balancing. So is this volume aligned with that volume? Is this really the sound that I'm getting volume wise? Are there peaks and troughs in some places that aren't meant to be? So that is a very important part in the mixing, the balance, right? If you get that right, everything else will be easier to work with, which brings me to my next point, which is about dynamics, right? So often musical pieces of work have dynamics, if you want to call it tension, release, loudness, softness, bigger choruses, quiet moments, there's emotional build-ups as well. You need to embellish those contrasts as well, because that's going to actually probably be the thing that when a listener says, oh, that sounded good, or that's coming from, from here or from there, and that actually has made me emotionally, really on a high, or it affected me, emotionally, right, in any sense of the word. They're the things that are going to be those things that are the sort of like the icing on the cake when you're mixing it. But from the start, that needs to be there as part of the performance as well. So those emotional sort of triggers that are there, you need to have them as part of the performance as well. So that's sort of like going back to the performance stage, the performance point of it. But as a producer, you need to really identify which parts they are and enhance them, right? Probably not embellish them all the time, but enhance them. And these are the things that are going to be really nice to the ear, and people are going to say, "Oh, I like that," sort of a thing. Which also brings me to my next point, and that sort of like coincides with the dynamics. It's the small details, right? The small details are something that those nuances are also very important, because those little smooth fade-ins, the clean edits, the reverbs, the effects that you're using, your panning of the stereo with those consistent levels, or those dynamic ranges that are coming in and out. Those small details are actually enhancing the whole experience, right? And the whole piece. And that's also, even though people don't know anything, or some of the people who are listening to these songs don't know anything about that, in theory, they can actually feel it and they can hear it. So it's very important to get those things right and at the right time of the piece as well. So very, very important. And I mentioned experience, which is the next point that I want to go into. The experience not only of the person who's recording, right, but is also of the performer, that you want to actually relay and portray that experience and that emotion to the actual listener, right? So to do this, you need to have the experience yourself. So the experience of you listening to these great polished recordings for years, and knowing what it's supposed to actually sound like, and what makes you feel good, and what makes the listener feel good, and that experience that you have, you need to portray it in the recording nearly all the time, right? So what the pros listen for is they've trained, or we've trained our ears on thousands of mixed and mastered pieces, whether they're pro, amateur, and we know what to do in regards to listening, and it's what we call critical listening, right? We don't just go there and offhand we know this or that. It's not magic. We've trained our ears for many, many, many years. Me, myself, as a producer, and as an audio engineer, as a performer, and also as an arranger and composer as well. We've trained our ears in different aspects of the whole stage of the recording facet, right? So it's the experience. The more projects you complete and the more you do, the more experience you're going to have, right? The other thing I'm going to say is that your experience has to portray to the experience of the listener as well, and the performer. So they're sort of like counting on you to give them this beautiful experience, whatever the song or whatever the piece might be, right? Now, some of the biggest myths, right, is that people think that if you buy better gear, you're going to produce a better sound, right? That's not the case. I do all my producing here in my home, and I don't have a lot of outboard, if any at all, right? So outboard gear. Now, the biggest myth is that people think that the more expensive gear you have, the better production you're going to have. That's not always the case, right? You got to know how to use that gear, and you got to have to know how to use your own gear. What can I do with my own gear to make it sound like that. So this is where sometimes the experience is a big part, but also sometimes you need to think outside the box, right? So to do this, it's an encompassing thing, right? So, and to think outside of the box is really pretty much listening to it from a different perspective, right? Saying, all right, so if I was to do this, what is it going to sound like? If I was to put this plug in here and experiment a little bit, is that going to enhance or is that going to make things worse? So these are the things that you need to have to listen out for. And if you take all the points that I've been talking about and you collate all of them, right, it's going to give you that sort of like basis of, all right, so for example, if I'm going to put a reverb plugin, is that going to fit the arrangement in that part of the song? Or if I'm going to put a certain effect on a certain instrument or on the vocal, is it going to fit it at that part of the song? Well, it might not fit it there, but it might fit it somewhere else. So the gear that you have, you need to be wary of, because we've all got plugins and we can all do those magical things, even with outboard gear. But the gear is not the be all and end all. You need to have the actual listening for it, and also be aligned with what the artist wants as well, and what the outcome should be. Sometimes all of the gear that you have and everything, you might not even use even 5% of. So you have to be mindful of using gear and be really mindful of how you're going to use it, if you're going to use it. So if you're getting frustrated because your recordings aren't sounding that pro quality or they're not at that standard, don't immediately blame certain things. Don't blame the equipment. Don't blame yourself. Don't blame the performer. Work through it, right? And go through the points that I've just mentioned. Is the performance great? Is the arrangement serving the song? Did I capture a good source quality of the audio? Have I left any space in the mix? Is it too cluttered? Am I listening critically? Right? So these are your foundation for getting a pro recording. At the end of the day, you need to really be open, not only with your not with your listening and your ears, but also with your mind. So you have to be really aligned also with the artist that you're recording for. If you're recording for yourself, aligned with yourself as well. Professional recordings are rare that one plugin or one thing will fix everything, or will, here it is, right? It's a result of a lot of things happening and a lot of moving parts that you need to really be wary of, and the decisions that you make throughout the whole project, right? And you need to be really aware of what's happening in that project and what the end goal is, right? And at the end of the day, it has to really sound, as expected from you as a producer, and also from the artist, and it has to provide a fantastic experience for the listener, and that's going to give you that pro audio recording sort of feel. And if you've liked what I've been talking about on this podcast, subscribe and give us a thumbs up, and we'll see you next time. Ciao.